The story takes place in a lively city, where the tall buildings sparkle under the sun, and the warm atmosphere makes you want to take a walk down the bustling streets. Inside one particular house, someone was busy with their usual chores. In the kitchen, a mother was carefully preparing a meal, putting her heart into every step. Her face showed how focused she was on her task. She chopped the vegetables, picking out each one with precision, getting everything ready to make a delicious dish. She picked up a ladle to taste the soup simmering on the stove. After a quick taste, she frowned slightly. Something was missing, maybe a bit more salt or a dash of spice. Without missing a beat, she called out to her daughter, her voice a blend of love and authority. In the background, ᴄᴏ, her blonde daughter, was lifting weights, her strong, toned body a result of her regular workouts. ᴄᴏ was sweating from her morning routine, which included weightlifting and stretching, all part of her dedication to staying in shape. "Can you go wake up your appa?" her mom asked, her tone firm but kind. ᴄᴏ glanced over at her mother, a hint of reluctance in her eyes. Not long after, ᴄᴏ walked into a room with a bright smile, excited to announce that it was time to wake up. But as she stepped inside, she was surprised to find a boy sleeping at his desk, with books and notebooks scattered all around him from a late night of studying. That boy was Young. ᴄᴏ watched him for a moment, taking in the calmness of his face as he slept. She couldn't help but think how cute he looked, a thought that made her smile to herself. Apparently, she didn't want to interrupt his sleep and just kept watching him, with a mixture of tenderness and admiration, enjoying that moment of tranquility before the day began. Suddenly, ᴄᴏ approached carefully, moving with the same subtlety as a cat, and began touching Young's back. The soft touch of her fingers on his skin provoked a reaction in her own body, making her face turn a deep shade of red as strange feelings welled up inside her. ᴄᴏ continued to touch his back delicately, and feeling braver, she slightly moved her hand to caress Young's face. The texture of his skin and the stillness of his sleeping expression fascinated her, creating a silent connection between the two. The silence enveloped the entire room, wrapping the atmosphere in an almost magical calm, and ᴄᴏ, still blushing, continued to watch her appa's face closely. But suddenly, her expression changed, and with a determined gesture, she grabbed his cheek tightly and told him in a firm tone to wake up, reminding him it was time to go to school. They began arguing loudly, their raised voices filling the space, and the sounds could be heard all the way to the kitchen where the mom was. Young, the protagonist, was upset because the abrupt wake-up had caused him to cramp up in his legs, making him writhe in pain as he tried to get up. ᴄᴏ turned around with a playful smile and asked, "What do you think of my new leggings? Do you like them?" The unexpected question left the protagonist momentarily stunned, not knowing what to respond. However, regaining his composure with a move, he gave her a slap on the butt and with a mischievous smile told her they looked very nice and that they should go eat. ᴄᴏ was taken by surprise by the unexpected response, feeling a tingle run through her body from the unanticipated gesture. Both of them descended from the room with refreshed energy. Young led the way, while ᴄᴏ followed closely behind, their steps lightly echoing on the stairs. When they reached the kitchen, Mom greeted them with a warm smile and asked, "Did you wake up, Young? Still a bit sleepy?" He greeted her with a good morning, then asked if they had slept well. Hearing the concern in Young's voice, Mom looked at him fondly, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. With a soft yet cheerful tone, she mentioned she had prepared silver miso soup for breakfast, a dish that always lifted everyone's spirits. Young was delighted to hear this, knowing that silver miso soup was one of his favorite meals. It had been a year since he'd moved into the house. As he got ready for the day, his thoughts drifted back to his life before the move. He recalled being in his old home, eagerly awaiting the results of his university exams. Then, with a shout of joy, he announced that he had been accepted to a prestigious university in Seoul. His mother and sisters rushed to congratulate him, and with a big smile, he proudly shared that he had placed second in the exam and received a full scholarship. He gleefully added that he had finally fulfilled his promise to move to Seoul and attend one of the top universities in the country. However, his mother, concerned, pointed out that the family's financial situation wasn't great and they wouldn't be able to afford his stay in Seoul. Despite her worries, Young, full of excitement, brushed off her concerns. He was determined to seize the opportunity he had worked so hard to achieve. Days later, Young arrived in Seoul, overwhelmed with amazement at the vast city. As he explored his new environment, a beautiful, curvaceous woman, accompanied by her equally attractive daughter, arrived to pick him up. Young watched them with curiosity, still unsure of what was going on. Just then his phone rang. It was his mother calling. In a worried tone, she explained that Seoul was a large and intimidating city, and it would be difficult for him to live alone. She suggested he reach out to her friend Yuna, who lived nearby and had shared many moments with him when he was younger, to see if she could take him in. Feeling a little embarrassed by the unexpected situation, Young turned to the women and, somewhat shyly, asked if they had known him as a child. The women exchanged silent glances, their eyes full of memories and nostalgia. Young studied them closely, trying to recall any details. Suddenly, a memory began to surface, and he remembered that during a childhood visit to Seoul, his mother's friend had welcomed him warmly. That visit had left a lasting and fond impression on him. The practical mom, not wasting any time, grabbed Young's luggage and firmly told him to come inside, commenting that it was too cold outside. Without further discussion, they guided him into his new home. So, unexpectedly but with warmth, Young found himself living with his mother's friend and her daughter. Now, in the present, Young was enjoying the delicious breakfast that Mom had lovingly prepared. With every bite, he felt grateful for the kindness and hospitality of these women, who had taken him in as if he were part of their family. "Don't you have in-person classes?" Yuna asked, intrigued, though she maintained her composure. Her daughter smiled and replied that even in webtoons, attendance wasn't required. Yuna began to drift into her thoughts, finding the new technologies and methods of studying quite complicated. With a thoughtful expression, she turned to Young and asked how the stew tasted, wondering if he noticed anything unusual about it. Young, always polite, responded that it was delicious, thanking her for every bite. The person in front of Jong was his mother's friend, Aunt Yuna. Although it was a request from a close friend, Young wondered if she owed his mother any favor, trying to understand why she had taken him in so kindly. However, he quickly dismissed that thought, concluding that couldn't be the case and that Aunt Yuna was just a good-hearted person, always willing to help. Well, aside from being kind-hearted, she's also an angel fallen from the sky. Young thought, admiring Yuna's kindness and beauty. An angel, an angel, an angel. The protagonist stammered, his eyes wider than soup plates, unable to look away from Yuna's generous breasts. Unable to resist, the protagonist dove into a sea of fantasies about Yuna, seeing her as beautiful as a spring flower. He drooled, imagining 1,001 scenarios with beautiful Yuna as the star of his thoughts. Neon, sitting right in front of him, noticed within 2 seconds that the protagonist's head was in the clouds. Without a second thought, and discreetly, stretched her leg under the table. She made contact and started massaging the protagonist's lower part. The effect was instant. He felt as though he'd been plugged into an electrical socket. A jolt ran through his body from top to bottom, and after what felt like an eternity, he collapsed onto the table, completely embarrassed. Yuna, looking startled, seemed more concerned than a first-time mother. Meanwhile, Neon, as calm as ever, announced she was going to school, acting as if nothing had happened. The protagonist couldn't help but think that his friend only resembled her mother in looks, as she didn't have a shred of sweetness or consideration. Nun was about to leave for university when she suddenly heard her mother, Yuna, call her in an urgent tone. She halted, turning around, and noticed that her mother was holding a bento in her hands. Yuna, looking visibly nervous, started to stammer as she offered it to her daughter. "I made steamed chicken," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought maybe you'd like to take it with you for the day." Her mother's gesture seemed like a genuine attempt to show affection, yet the tension in the air was unmistakable. The relationship between them appeared strained, and this brief exchange seemed to reflect the emotional distance between mother and daughter. Young, who was also present during the scene, watched quietly, sensing the awkwardness of the moment. He knew that, later, he would likely have to play a part in helping mend the rift between Yuna and Tun. Nin, slightly blushing and feeling a bit uncomfortable, wasn't sure how to respond to her mother's offer. With a mixture of gratitude and shyness, She accepted the bento from Yuna's hands, thanking her, though her words were somewhat hesitant. Meanwhile, Young approached, offering a polite smile as he thanked Yuna for her hospitality and said his goodbyes. Just before he left, Yuna, still visibly worried, called out to Young with an expression filled with both affection and seriousness. "Take care of my daughter," she asked, her voice tinged with genuine concern. Young, smiling, promised he would look after Nin, though he wasn't exactly sure how he would do so. As they walked to school together, the cool morning air surrounded them. Nun, with a curious glance and a small smile, asked her appa if he had a girlfriend. She reminded him that the second semester was almost over and inquired if there was anyone he was interested in. As they walked, Young, keeping his gaze on the ground, replied that he had been so caught up with his studies and adjusting to life in the city that he hadn't had a moment to think about dating. Nun, her expression tinged with disdain, reminded him that he had said the same thing the previous year. She advised him not to let his youth pass by while buried in his books, suggesting he needed to strike a balance between studying and enjoying life by socializing. "Isn't that normal for university students?" Young asked, a little confused by her advice. With a teasing smile, Nan responded that while studying was important, university life was also about having fun, spending time with friends, and meeting new people. "University guys should have a lot of fun too," she added, making her point clear. The scene shifted to the university campus, where students walked in pairs along tree-lined paths. Among the crowd, Young couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness as he noticed that he was the only one so focused on his studies, while others enjoyed their time with partners. Suddenly, Neon's attention was drawn to a couple who had broken away from the main group, heading toward a more secluded part of the campus, hidden among the trees and greenery. Unable to resist, Young wondered if the couple was seeking privacy for something more than just a casual walk. Hun, with a determined expression and a mischievous glint in her eyes, remarked that a noble person must always seek the truth behind things, implying that she was eager to uncover exactly what the couple was up to in that hidden spot. The couple, now in a hidden corner of the campus, was enjoying their time together. The scene was a mix of soft laughter and loving whispers as they immersed themselves in their small oasis of intimacy. The protagonist, watching from a safe distance, felt even more disheartened. The injustice of the situation hit him hard, as while others enjoyed their youth and love without restrictions, he felt trapped in an endless cycle of studying and responsibility. Young was observing the scene with a mix of fascination and embarrassment, his face visibly reddening. Nan, standing beside him, whispered with a mischievous smile that despite the uncomfortable situation, there was quite an interesting view. Curiosity and unease started playing with Young's nerves, as he wondered if it was possible for people so dedicated to studying to also find ways to have fun intensely, just like those now in front of them. As erotic sounds and moans began to fill the air, an atmosphere charged with intimacy and desire took over, making both Jong and Neon blush in unison. Nun, her face still flushed and slightly stammering, tried to keep her composure, pretending not to be affected by the situation. She asked Young to stop watching and suggested they leave before getting caught. Nun noticed something that completely surprised her. Jong's little friend, which had been inactive until then, had woken up and was clearly reacting to the stimulating scene in front of them. The couple in the corner was so immersed in their activities that the intensity of what they were doing was almost indescribable. Jong and Nun were left stunned by everything they had witnessed. The scene was far more intense than they had imagined. Later, Jong and Nan entered their classroom with their cheeks still burning with embarrassment, trying to hide the deep blush that overtook them. They couldn't avoid the awkward silence between them and refrained from mentioning the scene they had witnessed. Thus begins the story of Jong, a young man who, by a twist of fate and unexpected circumstances, finds himself living in Seoul at the house of his mother's friend. The question arises, will he manage to maintain a calm and orderly life, or will he succumb to the desires and temptations that seem to be part of the dynamic in his new home with the girls living with him? To find out how events will unfold, and which direction Jong's life will take, you'll need to dive into the reading of this work. The story bears the intriguing title, Secret Your Mom, promising a plot full of surprises and unexpected twists. Before signing off, This humble servant reminds viewers not to forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive alerts for future videos. The invitation is to stay up to date with every new release and not miss any updates until the next edition, where you'll continue to discover more fascinating stories. In the classroom, Nan and Jong watched intently as the couple, who had previously been intimate, sat nearby. The atmosphere felt somewhat uncomfortable, filled with hushed whispers and sidelong glances. Both were quietly wondering what would unfold now that the couple had arrived. The protagonist, surprised and curious, thought to himself that at least they showed up for class, implying they must care about their studies. He couldn't quite make sense of the situation, still shocked by their actions. Nun, processing the scene, remarked that she hadn't anticipated anything like this. "I never imagined I'd witness something like this," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Her voice carried a sense of astonishment, as if she couldn't fully grasp what she was seeing. The protagonist, both curious and confused, asked, "What did you expect to see?" His question hung in the air, making Nun pause. Blushing slightly, Nan admitted she had only anticipated a kiss, not the more intimate display. "I didn't expect to see people doing that," she added, her voice barely audible. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and she added that it felt odd for them to behave that way in a classroom. "I won't be able to stop thinking about the class president today," she murmured, almost to herself, as she tried to process the scene. Out of nowhere, a classmate shouted from the back of the room, "Don't talk so loud." The unexpected interruption caused the protagonist and Neon to flinch, their hearts racing from the sudden shock. Jong, attempting to lighten the mood, told Nun not to be so upset, joking that after all, that's just how people come into the world. However, his attempt at humor didn't seem to have the desired effect. In that moment, the protagonist felt a strange rush of thoughts invade his mind, almost as if an idea had suddenly taken root. He pictured Juna telling him about her wedding troubles and asking him to have a child with her. The scene played out vividly in his mind, and he found himself wondering if he was truly prepared for such a responsibility. Blushing deeply, he quickly apologized to Nun for sharing such thoughts, his voice shaking slightly from embarrassment and regret. Meanwhile, Nun looked around cautiously and noticed several other couples in the room. This made her start to worry about what others might think of her and Jong being together. Feeling a bit self-conscious, her cheeks flushed a gentle pink. Nervously, she muttered to Jong that if they stayed close, people would assume they were dating. It was a real concern for her. The protagonist, eager to change the subject, quickly told her to stop thinking about such things and focus on taking notes so she wouldn't end up needing to ask him for them later. He was trying to redirect the conversation to something more practical and less awkward. While the teacher was delivering her lecture, she noticed the protagonist and his friend talking and called them out, her voice ringing through the classroom, causing both of them to feel embarrassed and quickly focus on the lesson. "Nin, come see me after class," the teacher called out, her words drawing everyone's attention. Later, Nan found herself complaining to the teacher about being tasked with carrying boxes, arguing that it felt unfair, especially to women, her voice a mix of frustration and fatigue. ᴄᴏᴘᴘ, observing the situation, silently wondered how the boxes could possibly feel heavy for her, given that she lifted weights every morning. The teacher sighed deeply, then, with a serious expression, remarked that their mothers would be proud of them, adding, "How can you be so arrogant?" Her tone was firm, yet tinged with a sense of resignation. This teacher, a slender woman with a beautiful face, was a friend of Aunt Yuna. Her name was So-yeon, and her strong presence commanded respect from her students. As the protagonist and his friend began to argue, their voices rising, So-yeon sighed softly, watching them with a mixture of patience and weariness. Suddenly, her phone rang, interrupting the tension in the room and shifting everyone's attention. Surprised, she answered the call, and to their surprise, it was the manager. They began discussing work matters, while the protagonist observed her, still carrying the box with noticeable effort, intrigued by the conversation and trying to distract himself from his task. In that moment, Nan playfully placed her box on top of Yong's, as if making a joke. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, trying to ease the tension with her playful gesture. "You're going to carry it?" "Thanks a lot, Appa," she said with a sly smile. Annoyed by the situation, the protagonist shot back, telling her to stop being ridiculous, his voice revealing his irritation. Meanwhile, Soyeon was still on the phone, seemingly dealing with complaints from the manager. Her expression grew tense, and her voice became more serious as she looked down and sighed deeply, trying to regain her composure. It was clear that the conversation was taking a toll on her. Turning to the protagonist, who was struggling with 2 boxes, she asked, "What happened to Nin? Where did she go?" Her voice carried a mix of curiosity and concern. Noticing the protagonist's difficulty, Soyeon stepped forward to help him carry the boxes, thinking they were too heavy for him to manage alone. Her actions conveyed both understanding and support. "What was that long sigh about?" the protagonist asked, wanting to understand what had caused her to react so strongly. His question seemed to seek a connection, trying to uncover the cause of her distress. Soyeon apologized, and with a soft, sad tone, she revealed that she had been fired. Her words felt heavy, clearly reflecting the shock and disappointment she felt. She added that starting next semester, she wouldn't be teaching anymore, leaving the protagonist both surprised and concerned about her future. Soyeon let out a deep sigh and remarked that it was truly unfortunate to have been dismissed, her eyes reflecting both sadness and a sense of resigned acceptance. The protagonist, wanting to offer his support, spoke up, saying that it must be really difficult for her, apologizing for not knowing how to make her feel better. His voice showed a genuine desire to comfort her. Soyeon smiled faintly and thanked him for his kindness, appreciating his attempt to console her. With newfound resolve, she dropped the boxes to the floor and boldly declared that she no longer cared about being fired, her tone shifting to one of defiance, as if ready to confront the situation head-on. "Hey, handsome student, want to have a drink with me?" Sun suddenly asked, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Her invitation broke the tension, leaving the protagonist both confused and intrigued by the unexpected offer. Blushing slightly, a mix of nervousness and curiosity in his voice, he agreed, his mind swirling with questions as his heart raced, unsure of what he was getting into. Soyeon, clearly delighted, responded with enthusiasm, declaring that she wouldn't take him back. Her energy was contagious, even though the protagonist was still processing the unexpected turn of events. Later, they were both in a car, the atmosphere charged with tension and anticipation, with the vehicle parked in a secluded spot. The protagonist was lying back in the seat, completely flushed and unable to believe what was happening before his eyes. Everything felt surreal, as if he were living a strange dream. Above him was Soyeon, undressing slowly, her movements deliberate and assured as she asked the protagonist to go through with it. The scene was intense and charged with emotion, leaving the protagonist speechless, completely absorbed in the moment. The liquor store owner bid the protagonist and his companion farewell, advising them to be careful, his tone laced with concern as he noted the state the teacher was in. Yang was holding his teacher, trying to keep her from falling to the ground. He held her firmly, struggling to support her as Soyeon, completely drunk, couldn't stand on her own. Yang helped her walk, worried about her state and making sure she wouldn't get hurt. As he watched Soyeon appear to fall asleep, Yang questioned what he should do in situations like that. He recalled that he was trying to cheer his teacher up, that was his main goal, although the circumstances had taken an unexpected turn. Upon learning that the protagonist couldn't drink, Soyeon burst into laughter, her laughter contagious but also revealing her altered state. "Humans are like this, you'll have to manage your loneliness for the rest of your life," Soyeon said amid laughter, her tone blending amusement with a hint of mockery. She added playfully that when he went on a date and got action, he'd forget things for a while. Her words were direct and filled with innuendo. The protagonist, his face flushed, nervously asked if he should really be hearing things like that. His voice trembled slightly, showing his discomfort and surprise at Soyeon's comments. A bit irritated, Soyeon told him not to be embarrassed and pointed out that he was a man who had never been in a relationship. She told him he should go out more while he was still young, or he'd regret it later. Her words were a mix of advice and gentle reproach, as if imparting a life lesson. The protagonist, slightly calmer, listened carefully and responded that he would follow her advice. His voice was more composed, showing respect for her perspective. Professor Gu Soyeon, not Aunt Soyeon, held an important place in his life, being closely tied to both his mother and Aunt Yuna. Their connection went beyond just school. They had been childhood friends, a bond that had lasted for years. The protagonist had often heard stories of their travels together, though he didn't recall every detail. He knew those experiences were meaningful to them. With a firm tone, Jang told his teacher that she had drunk enough, trying to limit her intake out of concern for her well-being. Before leaving, the protagonist and Soyeon shared a toast with soju, marking a meaningful end to an emotionally charged night. Jang didn't enjoy the taste, finding it rather dull, but he chose not to voice his displeasure, wanting to maintain peace. As he looked ahead, he was taken aback to see his teacher asleep at the table. The sight was almost humorous, yet it also raised concerns about Soyeon's condition. Returning to the present, the protagonist had helped Soyeon into her car, finding himself in a fragile situation as he tried to manage everything carefully. He was on the phone, telling someone about a nearby convenience store and their location in the parking lot. His words were measured, focused on finding a solution for Soyeon's condition and keeping things under control. After hanging up, he reflected on what he had requested and whether they would be all right. His mind was clouded with doubt and uncertainty as he hoped everything would go smoothly. Soyeon woke up, still slightly tipsy, and noticed Jang standing outside the car. Her eyes barely opened, but she saw his figure in the dark. "What are you doing standing there?" she mumbled sleepily. Jang explained that he was waiting for the replacement driver. His response was short and to the point, clarifying why he was outside. Soyeon insisted he get in the car with her, her voice firm, not wanting to be alone in that moment. The protagonist, slightly embarrassed, assured Soyeon that everything was fine and told her not to worry, attempting to soothe her. "Do you want to make me feel bad?" Soyeon asked, her voice tinged with frustration and vulnerability. Jang, feeling he had no choice, accepted her invitation and climbed into the car, uncomfortable yet determined to stay by her side. He settled in, and unexpectedly, Soyeon rested her head on his lap. Taken aback by her sudden move, Jang wasn't sure how to respond, his mind racing with questions. "I'll borrow your knee to sleep for a while," Soyeon murmured softly. Though surprised, Jang whispered back that it was fine and that he'd let her rest. As she slept, Soyeon began to apologize quietly, her words mixed with confusion and regret. "It seems ironic to me that a woman who's lost her marriage is giving advice on how to live," she said, her voice breaking. Her confessions revealed her sadness and self-doubt, laying bare her vulnerability in front of Jang. "That's not true, Professor," the protagonist replied firmly, his voice filled with conviction. He went on to tell her he thought she was an incredible person, kind, and that the students deeply respected her. "I respect you a lot as a teacher too," he added, causing Soyeon to blush slightly, her cheeks turning a soft pink at the unexpected praise. With genuine enthusiasm, the protagonist declared that none of her qualities were pathetic, his eyes shining with sincerity as he encouraged her to see her worth. Soyeon was completely taken aback and blushing. Upon hearing those words from her student, she hadn't expected such a show of appreciation and support. "Be careful where you're touching," said Soyeon, making the protagonist blush deeply. He quickly pulled his hand back and began apologizing for everything. His words rushed as he tried to make up for any discomfort caused. In his sudden movement, his head hit the roof of the car. The impact was unexpected and painful, pulling a groan of pain from him. He was completely sore, and Soyeon noted he seemed very confused, her tone filled with concern as she observed his reaction carefully. "Is Jang still a baby?" asked Soyeon, intrigued, her voice a blend of teasing and curiosity. The protagonist, still in pain, responded firmly that he wasn't, his words steady as he tried to maintain his dignity. Soyeon could only look at him intently, her eyes reflecting a mixture of amusement and tenderness, as she couldn't help but smile at the situation, her cheeks lightly blushing. Then, Soyeon asked Jang to touch her, as he had done a moment before. Those words left Jang stunned, unsure how to respond to the unexpected request. "Don't you want to?" asked Soyeon, her tone mixing curiosity and challenge. When he didn't respond, she took Jang's hand and gently placed it on her chest, her heart beating quickly under his palm. The protagonist was completely overwhelmed as his hand rested there, touching something he'd never imagined he would. His thoughts were a whirlwind, trying to process what was happening. Without wasting any time, Jang started moving his hands, a little awkwardly at first, each movement sending an electric current through Soyeon's body. She asked him to keep going, her voice between sighs, reflecting a mixture of pleasure and longing. After a heated moment, they both began to remove the clothes they were wearing, moving with a mix of urgency and shyness. Their clothes fell to the one by one, revealing the warm and trembling skin of both. They shared a passionate kiss, their lips meeting with an intensity that seemed to stop time. At one moment, Soyeon paused, and with a playful smile, told him to wait a moment so she could take off her glasses. They continued what they were doing, the closeness of their bodies heightening the tension and desire in the air. In the midst of their passion, Soon paused and asked, "Was that your first kiss? I've shared so many of your first experiences today." Her voice held a mix of curiosity and pride, aware that she had been a part of these special moments with him. After that tender exchange, Soyeon, her tone gentle, gazed at Jason and asked if she could have him, her words hinting at her gratitude for his understanding and patience. Her eyes conveyed a blend of affection and longing, and the air between them was thick with intimacy. Jang, still a little disoriented by the intensity of the moment, took a moment to process her question. Then, without hesitation and with unexpected resolve, he answered simply, "Yes." His voice, though soft, carried a quiet determination, expressing his readiness to continue experiencing this connection together.